So it's come to my attention that in the trailer for the new LEGO Star Wars, we actually get to see some dismemberment. Probably the most memorable arm chopping off from all the films, Vader cutting off Luke's arm. But wait a second, LEGO Star Wars has dismemberment, but the new AAA Star Wars title completely focused on lightsaber combat doesn't? Hey everyone, it's Andrew. Just the other day, it was confirmed that Jedi Fallen Order won't have any human dismemberment, and that decision is coming from the top of Lucasfilm, Disney, and the Star Wars brand. Brandon Kelch, lead designer on Jedi Fallen Order, said they used the films as a reference for when dismemberment should be used in the game, and that is in powerful, critical plot moments. So that's potentially going to be the only time it's used in the game on humans, and I think you can understand why this is the case. If the game were to include frequent human dismemberment, it would be a much more brutal, higher rated game, which doesn't really align with the family-friendly image Star Wars has created for itself in recent times. Gone are the days where self-appointed keepers of the peace went around unnecessarily beheading bounty hunters. Lightsabers are once again adopting the elegance traditionally associated with fencing and musketeering, as described by Ben Kenobi, an elegant weapon
for the more civilized age.
I love how this is the more civilized time he was talking about. Literally the most uncivilized battle in all of Star Wars. Now, it seems the limited use of dismemberment is not only a restriction imposed on Fallen Order, but is something applied to all Star Wars titles. A story artist for the Clone Wars Season 7 commented on how they were allowed to use lightsabers in the show, stating that one of the rules they were given was to always hide the cut in case of decapitation, and to never show blood. The burn of a lightsaber is supposed to cauterize the wound instantly, which basically means sealing it off with heat so that it doesn't bleed, which is kind of what we're seeing in Jedi Fallen Order. Every time Cal slices a stormtrooper, we see burn marks, and in some cases, maybe even a little torso tearing. Ugh, ouch. However, this doesn't mean there won't be any dismemberment in Fallen Order. It's been confirmed you will be able to cut limbs off certain droids and non-human species in the game. The extent of this is still unknown, but it will be in there. For example, you can cut the pincers off giant spiders. Just what I always wanted to do. Attack and fight giant spiders. It's as if they tapped into my nightmares and were like, here, let's put this in the game, and now we're fighting giant spiders and I'm not happy. But does the lack of dismemberment mean this game won't be brutal? Do we need to be able to brutalize helpless stormtroopers for Cal to be considered as much of a warrior as Mace Windu? Of course not. Have you guys seen some of these takedowns, like the one where Cal force pulls a stormtrooper towards him, grabs him by the throat, then forces his lightsaber through the stormtrooper's chest? What about the one where he spins and trips a purge trooper, then before the trooper even hits the floor, Cal slams his lightsaber through the trooper's stomach? Are these types of fancy takedowns really the Jedi way? One could argue they're even more brutal than dismemberment. I mean, he's just a poor stormtrooper and you're literally freezing him in time and walking him into his own blaster bolt while force choking him around the neck. Wouldn't it be more humane just to cut him in half? But then you'd argue, if there's no dismemberment and the lightsaber doesn't easily slice through anything except another lightsaber or electro staff, then does it still feel like a lightsaber? And how does this affect gameplay and realism? Based on what the prequels showed us, and even parts of the original trilogy, lightsabers can cut through basically anything. So does not being able to do this affect the universe immersion of this game? Well, let's take a look at all the other Star Wars games that don't include dismemberment. All the Battlefront games.
Sector is clear. Not clear! Not clear!
The Old Republic. Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. The First Force Unleashed. Star Wars Obi-Wan from 2001. Star Wars Racer. No dismemberment in this game for sure. You could maybe, with the speed these things go, drive into someone and cut them in half, but it doesn't happen in the game. I want a new pod racer game. I've talked about this before. I really want a new pod racer game. This is where Star Wars is at. Racer Remastered. Go get on that. All of these games I mentioned are still fun to play, each in their own ways, and none of them feature kills as brutal as the takedowns we've seen Cal perform in Jedi Fallen Order. None of these games, except maybe The Force Unleashed, have as advanced a lightsaber combat system as Fallen Order. So what we're getting with Fallen Order is a developed, thought-out combat system with violent takedowns with the same or even more brutality than any of the other games I just mentioned. This is brutal. He literally slams the lightsaber lightsaber through the guy's chest, as if that not. Now, one thing I think we should also discuss is balancing. Can you balance a game when your player has a saber that's supposed to cut through pretty much anything? Well, yes, that's where opposing melee weapons are thrown into the mix, having troopers with electro staffs and batons. And these guys can pretty much still be killed in one hit. The Purge troopers take a couple more, but I'm not even sure they're human, to be honest, unless they're just really tall people. These guys at EA Play weren't really all that tall though. Okay, I looked it up. Purge troopers are the last batch of Django's clone troopers. So they're clones, which means they are humans. But in terms of balancing dismemberment, having you play as a prequel version of a Jedi, which is basically a superhero who can both manipulate objects with their mind and cut through anything with their saber, may make balance much harder to achieve in combat. Whereas if you play as a regular Jedi or a Padawan like Cal, who's not just a force-wielding beast like Starkiller and has all these crazy ridiculous moves like pulling Star Destroyers out of space, I seriously still can't believe they included that in the game. The guy literally pulls a Star Destroyer out of the sky. I mean, it's a bit overkill. No wonder this isn't canon anymore. Then it's easier to achieve a balanced combat system with weaker enemies and enemies which make more of a match. But maybe being an overpowered superhero is what the Jedi Sith experience should be all about. Kind of like Starkiller, he's overpowered. Or should it be more of a struggle, like Luke seems to have, or Cal? I feel like I'm raising more questions than I'm answering. Do you really want to one-hit kill everyone? Maybe you do. But another thing the devs need to consider is that different countries have different restrictions when it comes to dismemberment in video games. In Australia, where I'm from, R-rated games or restricted rated, the highest level of rating, were only approved for sale in 2013 when our restriction laws changed. So the publisher of Fallen Order obviously wants their game to be played and sold in as many countries as possible, and therefore probably aren't going to include a feature preventing it from legal sale in certain countries based on their restrictions. So they take the safe route and go with no dismemberment. Alright, now I want to go back into the films and look at some context for this whole thing. In all the Star Wars films, by my count, there are only 27 dismemberments. Now, most of these were at pivotal moments or influenced the plot in some way, like Anakin having his limbs cut off and gradually turning into a machine that's Darth Vader, or Mace Windu showing us all the true Jedi way.
We're keepers of the peace, not soldiers.
However, one of these dismemberments throws this whole argument on its head and may be the most crucial of them all. The first dismemberment in all of Star Wars, Obi-Wan cutting off Ponda Bubba's arm. This is the first time we ever see a lightsaber in action in the films, and it does exactly what we all expect it to do. The only thing is, it didn't cauterize the wound. I mean, this was still Star Wars in its very early days, so the specific rules about what a lightsaber does hadn't really been introduced into the galaxy yet, or the restrictions for movie violence were different back in the 70s, hence the blood. Or Ponda Bubba, being an alien, had a different anatomy to humans, with an open circulatory system and different blood vessels, which is why his wound didn't cauterize like other people that get cut by lightsabers. Whichever thing works for you. But what's important here is that this scene shows exactly what a lightsaber does. It cuts things right off. So, with everything considered, can you have a lightsaber that doesn't cut off limbs? Does Jedi Fallen Order need dismemberment for its combat to be enjoyable and believable? What do I think? No. Not at all. Based on what we've seen from the gameplay and what I mentioned earlier, combat is strategic, requires pacing, thought. You can't just run in there like when General Grievous turns into a double windmill and then expect everyone's limbs to go flying. Have you guys seen this Clone Wars thing? It's freaking epic. Go watch this. He is really scary in this show. I think it's important to also note that your abilities in combat will also grow and evolve as you unlock more moves on the skill tree and as you play through the game, which will hopefully keep combat varied and fresh. And like I said earlier, the game is still brutal, with its takedowns and slow motion finishes. This is just as brutal as anything in the prequels. So what do you think? Does Jedi Fallen Order need dismemberment, or will the game still be fun regardless? Let me know in the comments, and come join my Discord to discuss more about Fallen Order, LEGO Star Wars Battlefront, and more. I hang out there from time to time. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Bombastic, where I post stuff all the time, like me wearing these Lando socks. I showed them off the other day. And go watch my last Fallen Order video about all the best, most brutal force powers in the game that we know about so far. Cal is actually more brutal than Mace Windu, I guarantee that. This is nothing compared to what Cal's gonna do in this game. And thanks for watching this. My name's Andrew. I really need to figure out a way to start selling these, man. As if you wouldn't want Lando socks.
Stay bombastic.